and over at Centerview that will engage in part of the budget discussions as we go through those tonight. So I will now turn it over to Mr. Fearborn and let you take it away, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mayor Turnbow, members of the council, the proposed operating budget for the fiscal year 2021 is hereby submitted for your consideration. As a matter of housekeeping, having introduced that and gotten that out of the way, you see before you the core team here in the front chairs. As I think I had discussed, Mr. Crass, Mr. Mustine immediately behind us, because obviously a significant portion of the budget involves these individuals at these. Do not want to discount, of course, Ms. Williams, our finance director, who is, as she keeps putting it, baby in the corner over here. Mr. Zur, who is attorney in the corner over there. And the rest of our magnificent team is in the Crystal Palace over in the Gilmore Room at DEF CON 1 this evening. So on with kind of a general 30,000-foot overview of the budget. The determination of the annual budget, as the council many times brings up, and you also hear from me, is the single most important endeavor of the City Council. It is a living, breathing document that guides our strategic plan and the way that we move forward as a city and the way we bring services to our citizens. The proposed budget provides a guideline of targeted government services. The economic outlook that we're faced with in these incredible times in the presentation of this particular budget. Currently, we are anticipating continued but slower growth than what we have actually seen this year in residential and commercial development. Fiscal year 2020 sees approximately 500 residential permits. That is primarily because of the multifamily residential permits that are coming on. Obviously, we do not anticipate that next year, and even if we knew of something, it would be speculative, so we would not be plugging that in as an exact. So for 2021, we were actually assuming 100 multifamily / residential single-family home permits for next year, and all of the revenues associated with that as far as permits, estimating what our franchise taxes will be from utilities are all based on that 100 number. Obviously, things are a little bit different both this year and in proposed 2020 fiscal year 2021 due to COVID-19 and the impacts of the pandemic. There can be no doubt that the pandemic has had impacts in all areas of the Raymore economy, on individual household spending patterns, and in participation in local and regional events that have impacted us. Fortunately, Raymore, as I've discussed with the council, is uniquely positioned in our commercial and industrial economic landscape, so we saw little to no impact on our sales tax collections. Unfortunately, the decline in participation in programs, especially in Parks and Recreation, has significantly impacted our Parks and Recreation Fund for the end of fiscal year 2020 and in the reopening uncertainty of fiscal year 2021. So Mr. Mustine, in presentations to his park board and to me, has been rightfully conservative in considering what next year's revenues were going to be. The offset to that is, of course, if a program doesn't make, we also don't have the expenses that are associated with it, but we obviously run on margins that are slightly higher than the cost of service in Parks and Recreation. So we see a heavier decline in revenues than what we would see as far as a decline as expenses are concerned in Parks and Recreation. The Enterprise Fund, because it is cost of service, and we've presented that to you, we'll be formally presenting the Enterprise Fund to you all coming up here shortly. Will not be impacted by this because obviously we adjust the rates accordingly in the Enterprise Fund. The proposed budget for fiscal year 2021 will show, as we always do, summaries of the revenues expenditures included for all of the city funds, and we show you the actual expenditures and revenues for fiscal year 2018, now fiscal year 2019, fiscal year 2020 adopted, amended, and expected ending budget in both revenues and expenditures. And in fiscal year 2021, the department requested budget. This year, there are occasions when I have reason to have to cut certain items from the original presentations that came to me from the departments. The department heads were nothing short of magnificent this year in recognizing the uncertain times associated with their expense budgets within their departments. So you will note that the department requested and city managers' proposed budget to you all are identical for fiscal year 2021. Ahead of time, I want to thank everybody who is, all our department heads who are over at the Gilmore Room tonight. I want to thank all of our department heads who are here tonight. It has been an incredible process this year and an incredibly difficult process this year. Everybody feels uncertainty. Everybody feels a degree of isolation, which could have led to a certain amount of departmental siloing, if you will. My department ahead of yours, that does not exist with this team. Everybody is in it for everybody else, and we all know what we face each and every year, but especially this year with the proposed budget that is in front of the council. So my sincere thanks go to those department heads. A very special thank you to Ms. Williams, who plays a major role every year in producing the document, to Mr. Eakey for his invaluable assistance and advice in putting the document before you, and to Chief Zimmerman and Mr. Cataret, who give me significant background information and advice as I am finalizing the budget that is before you this evening. And with that being said, I will move to the city manager's proposed fiscal year 2021 budget detail. Depending on how you like to follow along, I bring this up each year. Some of you like to follow along with the written version. That's the way you process. Others just like to see the summary sheet. I begin with the general fund each year. If you kind of like to look at the numbers that I'm referencing, that particular summary sheet is on page 35 of your budget. So, to get to the proposed budget for fiscal year 2021, we have to analyze how we anticipate ending the current fiscal year 2020 that we are in. To do that, you will remember that last year at this time, we had to do some estimating on how we were going to end fiscal year 2019. We obviously have those exact numbers now in presenting this to you, so that's always where we have to begin. We have to go back 2 years from the fiscal year that we're actually proposing to you all. So last year at this time when we were presenting the budget, we had estimated that expenditures over revenues for the year would be $441,954. When we finalized those numbers, the expenditures over the budget, a budget deficit if you will, were short of that number, which is a good thing, at $252,857, which meant over our projected for the end of year fiscal year 2019, there was an amount of $189,097 more that went into ending fund balance for fiscal year 2019, beginning fund balance for fiscal year 2020. And if you're looking on page 35, you see that as the difference between the council adopted at the beginning balance for 2019-2020, our current fiscal year, of $3,004,427. We are actually at, for a beginning balance for this year, $3,193,524. The direct accounting for the reason on that is we did not expend as much at the end of fiscal year 2019 as we were estimating to get through the end of the last quarter of that year. That represents a beginning balance for fiscal year 2020 that is 6.29% higher than what we had put into the proposed and council adopted budget for the current fiscal year. In our current fiscal year, 2020 revenues are projected to come in $77,148 higher, 0.77%, than the fiscal year 2020 budget. A couple of highlights on that. Franchise taxes continues to erode every single year. I think we have hit pretty close to rock bottom on home or landline telephone. The last of the folks who are going to get rid of those have gotten rid of them. The rest of them are probably using them for note hangers on the wall because everybody's got cell phones now. The reason that we are seeing a continued erosion in this particular line item is due to the spending patterns associated with wireless telecom. Nearly all of us probably have a one payment plan for unlimited texting, unlimited phone service. That impacts the amount of growth in revenue. All of those plans have changed to that unlimited type plan. That's what we're getting, and that's why we continue to see the erosion in franchise taxes associated with that. Sales taxes are projected to be $36,200 higher, 1.03 than budgeted in spite of the pandemic. Fees and permits revenue line item is projected to come in higher than budgeted at $148,926,000, 76.46%. That is, again, comparing budget to budget or budget to actual that came in. We had a low amount in the budget last year of 85 homes for permits that we budgeted. We obviously came in significantly higher than that at 500 and everything that's associated with that particular revenue line item. So we are thinking that in this year, the 148 above budget is going to be about where we end up landing by October 31st. We obviously cannot plan on that amount for next year. Total expenditures for fiscal year 2020 are projected to be $78,844 below the amended expenditure budget, a 0.76% decrease. So, in summary for fiscal year 2020, the combination of the higher projected surplus, beginning balance, the projected fiscal year 2020 revenues being slightly higher than budgeted and expenditures being down from what was budgeted result in a projected unreserved gross fund balance at the end of fiscal year 2020 in the amount of $3,307,534. This amounts to $270,306 more than we had budgeted for at the beginning of November 1, 2019 for this particular fiscal year. That represents an 8.9% increase. Any questions on fiscal year 2019 and getting through the end of the current fiscal year? Terrific. So I'll move into fiscal year 2021 revenues. Again, we would, at this point in time, we would anticipate a beginning fund balance in the gross amount of $3,307,534. Revenues to add to that. Staff projects total fiscal year 2021 revenues to come in $214,299, 2.15% higher than the fiscal year 2020 budget amount, and $137,151 higher than fiscal year 2020 projected receipts. Some highlights of those revenues that we are projecting for next year. Property tax and real property tax and personal property tax, which is a true driver of this particular number, in our case, we are budgeting to be $77,844 or approximately 5% higher than projected received in fiscal year 2020. Again, most of the revenues, what I like to go back to is what we're projecting. That way we can see actual to where we're budgeting rather than a budgeted number that we know was projected all the way back on November 1.
Mr. Fearborn, if I could ask.
Sir.
So a little slow in the uptake here, so I wanted to go back to your question as if we had any questions. So what was the impact of this council's conservative position last year with regard to the fund balance? I know that we had because of some unknowns, we had, with the different projects that we're finishing up, we had decided that you had told us at the time that the council had about $1 million there for specific projects or certain projects. But not knowing what was going to happen in 2020, was that, in hindsight, what is helping us through the 20 budget season?
If the council could turn your attention to page 35, and you see the 2019-2020 council adopted budget, and you look at down below the expenditures, at total expenditures, you will see you adopted expenditures of $9,940,643, took the cautionary approach of not spending fund balance, and we ended up at $10,110,982 after the amendments that were associated with unknowns that occurred during the year, some of which were directly related to the pandemic. As I've said to many of you, of course, we were conservative because we had unknowns. We didn't have a pandemic at the time, so sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. And I'm not calling you all luckier than smart, but when we took that approach, it paid off for us, sir.
It absolutely did. Okay, thank you.
So moving on from the property tax for fiscal year 2021, franchise tax receipts for fiscal year 2021 are budgeted to come in $65,339, or 3.05% higher than the fiscal year 2020 projected amount. Again, this represents 100 new residents being assumed in fiscal year 2021. Sales taxes. Sales tax receipts overall. Now, earlier I had talked about the city sales tax, but remember that particular category has other sales taxes associated with it: vehicular sales tax, gasoline sales tax. So when all of those are added together, we are assuming a very modest increase of $20,435 in fiscal year 2021, which is 0.57% higher than the fiscal year 2020 projected amount. Fees and permits saw, again, as I've discussed, a significant amount of single-family homes in fiscal year 2021, however, and only assuming the 100 single-family units, overall in fees permits, staff is estimating a decrease in this revenue source of $132,400 from fiscal year 2020 projected. Again, not budgeted, but projected. This has more to do with the fact that fiscal year 2020 was an excellent year for us with 500 of those permits, as opposed to any sort of a catastrophic or significant downturn in what we would normally budget for from a conservative standpoint in that particular group of revenues. Municipal court. We're anticipating that fiscal year 2020 revenues will come in $50,079 under budget, a 15.34% decrease. The reason is obvious. We've had some virtual cases, but there's also been a downturn in the number of actual court appearances and the number of ways that we have to collect the revenues that should be coming into there. We do think it will rebound in next year, so we are proposing for fiscal year 2021 that the budget be virtually stagnant with just a 0.25% increase over the budgeted fiscal year 2020, not the actual fiscal year 2020 in that particular case, because it's a little bit different than some of our other locations in the general fund. As always, we do have a transfer into the general fund from the transportation fund to support transportation-related general fund expenditures. I am proposing that that be maintained at $320,000 for fiscal year 2021. Transfer from the stormwater sales tax fund. We are proposing, as always again, we have a transfer into the general fund to offset the salaries associated and other expenses associated with our stormwater efforts within the general fund. Again, proposing that that amount be $300,000 in fiscal year 2021, the same as fiscal year 2020. Do want to point out a difference in my overall budget proposal relative to the sales tax fund and the park sales tax fund. As I discussed with the city council, and it only impacts, I'm plugging it in here because it's the first introduction of the stormwater sales tax. Again, I want to emphasize to the council, the transfer into the general fund remains the same, even though I am proposing a different split of the 20% that is council at your discretion as far as how those funds are split. As I discussed with the city council earlier, the impact on our Parks and Recreation Fund has been significant and will be significant in fiscal year 2021 compared to our other funds associated with the pandemic. By statute, you have to allocate 40% of park storm sales tax funds to the parks sales tax fund and 40% to the stormwater sales tax fund. For several years now, I have recommended that the 20% discretionary be split 10% and 10% right down the middle between those two funds. The stormwater sales tax fund can sustain itself for the next couple of years if that amount is reduced slightly. So I am proposing that the stormwater sales tax that you discretionary allocate to the park sales tax fund 15% and 5% to the stormwater sales tax fund out of those funds. And I'll get to that when I get to the park fund and the stormwater sales tax fund as well. Transfer from the enterprise fund, there is always a direct transfer in the enterprise fund to account for those expenses such as our utility billing clerks, that is the sole item that they do is work for the enterprise fund. They're paid out of the general fund because they're in the finance office. Do not propose any change to the formula that is used for that. This year, that formula would indicate a transfer from enterprise into the general fund to pay for administrative overhead and direct costs of $967,988. Capital projects and administration. This number, I will tell you ahead of time, will most likely go up. Each year, we allocate for our administrative expenses associated with capital projects an amount to offset the work that we do for those capital projects. We usually do not like to make that allocation unless we are doing 100% of the engineering / architectural / background work, geotech work that's going to be associated with that. Those will come. They will be most likely associated with our geo bond projects. Right now, the one that we have that we do exclusively ourselves, and this was the same last year when I proposed the budget to you all, is the $6,000 that's associated with street preservation. So we propose that transfer again. Compensation, benefits, and staffing. Fiscal year 2021, the proposed budget includes improving the entire salary chart by 1% and then stepping all of our employees through the chart. This results in a proposed salary increase of approximately 3.5% for all of our staff. This was a tough year to do this. It would have been simple to be cautious, but we are proposing an ending fund balance, available fund balance to you all of $1,303,987. Our most important asset is our people. That's where our citizens are most served. That's who our citizens see the most. And it has been proven in this pandemic and in these times that that is important to our citizens. And honestly, they've earned it. Health insurance across the board, health, vision, medical, dental, is proposed a 5% increase. We still do not have these numbers back. As you can imagine, that is an area in flux. As you know, I have proposed to the council, and you have accepted that we get a benefits specialist to replace our administrative assistant. It's going to be an interesting year with that. The reason that we are sticking with the original 5% that we proposed at the beginning of the process all the way back in July with our department heads is what Mr. Icky is hearing and what Ms. Auger is hearing from our benefits folks is that the pandemic once again puts us in a unique position where there has been an underutilization of our plans. That would be the only category that would change my recommendation to you all of the 1% improvement to the chart. The baseline will always be to move our people through the chart. That's their merit. But if we had to, the 1% would be what would be impacted if somehow things got way out of hand with the insurance. Loggers, interestingly enough, is proposing for beginning November 1st a decrease in the general employee population, the contribution associated with that, from 15.5 to 15.4. Again, we're non-contributory, meaning the city pays the entire amount for loggers. And in the Swarm Police Department, a decrease from 17.8 to 17.6. We already have their numbers for fiscal year 2022. They will both go up from this particular point. As far as personnel are concerned, the deputy city, I am proposing to the city council that the deputy city clerk position be eliminated and that be moved to an administrative assistance position. As we often do in the finance department, there is a fluctuation between an accountant and an assistant finance director. As somebody is coming in and they're starting to be trained up, their role is more of an administrative assistance position. I have discussed this. You may be wondering what's going to happen with our existing deputy city clerk. As you know, Ms. Warner was one of our retirement incentive folks. As I had indicated to the council, the beauty of that is it gives us the opportunity to plan. Ms. Erica Hill has accepted the position beginning November 1st of city clerk. You all also know how strongly I believe in promoting within whenever possible. She has excelled at learning the position. She's going to be a great member of this team, and she's going to be technically as proficient as they come. I am sure the council will not miss a beat with Ms. Hill sitting in the seat that Ms. Warner has so long occupied and so well occupied. When you see all of this, and if you're looking at page 35, you'll notice that revenues over expenditures, which I will get to here in just a moment, down at the bottom in the green are 11,667 in revenues over expenditures in the proposed budget. Was going to be recommending to the council that we keep that in case something happened. Well, something happened. We won't need to be doing a budget amendment. I will keep this budget in front of the council for November 1, but we have had two of our dispatchers who are highly qualified ask if they can be admitted into the police academy. And we have done this before with two of our officers. The morning that the chief brought this to me, it was with at that point in time, that revenue over expenditures amount was $310. And she came to me and she said, I know this is so late in the game and I hate to do this, and I know it would be a budget amendment without knowing where the funds are going to come from for next year, but can we do this program? And I said, it has worked. It is a good program. go ahead and sign them up for the academy, and we'll figure out a way to pay for it, even if we have to remember that it's a one-time cost, because it's a one-time school cost for them to go through. That afternoon, Ms. Williams came to me with the revised budget, and the $11,667 was plugged in there against an amount to send 2 of the officers to the academy of $11,800. So I took it as a sign that we're supposed to be sending 2 of our dispatchers to the police academy this year. Departmental notes in line with the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget. Administration, we are proposing a decrease in the 2020 City Council amended budget by $64,025. This decrease is primarily due to personnel costs associated with retirement and departmental personnel changes, which I have just discussed. The ITS department fiscal year 2021 budget amount is proposed to decrease from the fiscal year 2020 budget by $18,640. Exact same reason the administration department is expected to go down. Buildings and grounds, the fiscal year 2021 budget is proposed to decrease from the fiscal year 2020 budget by $23,333. This decrease primarily represents the decrease in personnel costs associated with the reallocation of parks personnel to the Parks Department that was associated with contract mowing in city buildings. We had brought that budget amendment to you in the middle of this year to go with contracted mowing. The fiscal year 2021 budget for this department, finance, for this department is proposed to increase from the fiscal year 2020 amended budget by $42,820. This is primarily associated with credit card payments for utility payments, as we have increased our online presence and our ability to call in and use your credit card without actually coming to the window. We are looking at ways to try to make this more revenue neutral, not by changing the program, but by changing the way we are charged by both the credit card companies and our credit card processing companies. Sir.
Could you go up 2 bullet points to development services? That showed a $42,000 increase from 20
And
to
it is primarily associated with personnel changes and benefits. We've had 2 people go in and out of that particular department, and there were changes and differences in the benefits that they were asking for from the city. Police, the fiscal year 2021 budget for this department is proposed to increase from the 2020 budget by $185,295. The police department has exceeded a $4 million budget in this particular proposed budget. That is as it should be. And these are associated with only personnel changes that I have proposed to you previously within this budget, as far as salary increases are concerned and some changes in the benefits. Transfers from the general fund to the park fund, we would propose that continue at $100,000 in support of the parks fund. Expansion items that are included in this budget, there are 2 of them. Every couple of years within the Economic Development Department, we propose what are called turtles. Those are the little pancakes that you see sitting in the street. We go through those a dime a dozen. They wear out fast, and it just seems like we don't get the quality of reporting from them that we could get from utilizing a utility service that actually does this for us. And I have seen this proposal from Mr. Gress. We get a myriad more information by using one of these firms and paying the $5,000 a year. And when you look at it over the period, the course of several years, it's actually a monetary savings compared to buying the piece of capital equipment that's going to run out year after year after year. And we always put those in the operating fund. It's not a capital purchase. Website redesign, $9,100. This allows us to take advantage of a credit that we got with the first website redesign. They had plugged in a credit, you may remember, when we went with this particular website company. This is the last year that we can take advantage of that credit, and so we are proposing $9,100, which is in this budget now. Expansion items out of the general fund that are not included in the city manager's proposed budget: an attenuator for streets. An attenuator is a multi-vehicle device. It's basically a trailer that it is basically a crash bar for when they're out in the streets. They hit it, it protects our employees who are working in the streets. The attenuator absorbs the impact. Definitely an employee safety item, just simply couldn't afford it. The dump bed plow and spreader, you'll remember we lost 2 of our dump trucks this year because they were bad dump trucks. The VERP fund allowed for 1.5 purchases to be made of new trucks. We were able to buy an entirely new dump truck with all of the accessories that are necessary, specifically a dump bed and a plow, those things that are necessary to actually make it a dump truck. And one of them we could only afford out of accumulated fund in the VERP fund because we had to sell those off early. We were only able to buy a chassis. So we will have, coming up in 2021, 1.5 dump trucks sitting down at Public Works. They had asked for all of the accessories to go with that: the dump bed, the plow and the spreader, at a cost of $77,972 out of the streets budget. Once again, the budget simply, as you can see, we only had $11,000 and that got spent. I'll get there. Fiscal year 2020 ending fund balance, or 2021, first correction, second correction. Fiscal year 2021 ending fund balance for operations. After all the foregoing, it is projected that the general fund ending fund balance will be a total of $3,319,202. After reserving an amount equivalent to the 20% of operating expenditures in accordance with council policy, which is $2,015,215, that leaves a net unrestricted available fund balance of $1,303,987 at the end of fiscal year 2021. This amount is available for additional use as the council would direct staff. Again, as I say each year, it would be wise of the council to consider only one-time purchases that would be associated with that and not recurring costs. Recurring costs will jump up and get us in future years as that fund balance continues to go down. Normally recurring costs would be associated with employee salaries. We do not want to put someone on who we will eventually simply have to lay off because we run out of fund balance. Examples of one-time costs would be the expansion items that were not included in the city manager's proposed budget. That concludes staff report on the general fund, sir, if the council has any questions.
Yes, Mr. Holman.
Thank you, sir. So it was last year or the year before that we did kind of an employee recognition day where we did, you guys did training and a benefits seminar that you said was pretty well received. I believe our cost in that was fairly minimal. We had to pay overtime for like police and some of the folks that have to be out there all the time. Is that in here, or is that something you would consider doing again?
It is, sir. It is the Columbus Day Employee Retreat Day.
I hate to ask questions about the budget because you've always got it taken care of, but thank you.
Mr. Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a quick question regarding the restricted balance that we have, the 20%. I see here that you indicated that the stormwater sales tax fund kind of helped with regards to the Parks Department, but I was curious to know how the other departments, was there discussions, or did we get to the point where we're considering having to tap into the reserves at all? But you did say earlier that we were fortunate based on how our commercial sales tax looks. I was just curious if we got to that point where it was a possibility, or were we okay?
The other fund, yeah, as far as the stormwater sales tax supplementing them?
Well, Particular to our reserve balances, you know, was there ever a point where we had to consider looking at that to prop us up for next year's budget, to kind of start? Because I know the restricted balances, that 20% we set aside, you know, as an emergency to kind of prepare for the next year's budget. Did we get to that point at all because of COVID?
No. Again, we ended up spending the difference between the 10,982 and the proposed 9,840,000, which didn't get us close to hitting even available fund balance for fiscal year 2020.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Burke.
Thank you. Just for historical reference, back in the first decade of 2000s, like 7, 8, 9, was there ever a point that we did move into the reserves to make up for the shortfalls?
We have never used available fund balance. Or, I'm sorry, we have never used restricted reserve fund balance. And it is there, well, this doesn't sound very financial, but I'd chew my arm off before I presented that to the council. I mean, we'd just have to be, we would use it to pay salaries.
Right. I just was curious because I felt like another entity could have used some of their reserves to not do cuts on salaries and things, and I wondered if that had happened here. And I didn't figure that it probably did happen here because I feel like this is a superior organization.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Fairborn. So you're getting ready to move on to the park fund, I know, but I know that I kind of heard some noise from the council members when you talked about the expansion items that were not included in the budget, but you're offering a net unrestricted fund balance of 1.3 million. Is there maybe some appetite within the council that those $106,362 of items be included in the budget and that amount reduced by that amount? Does anybody feel good about doing that? The attenuator and the dump bed plow and spreader? I mean, it seems to me like that's kind of low-hanging fruit for that particular use. One's a safety issue and the other one is a preparation issue. I would think that might be a good one. Yes, Mr. Holman.
I would concur, especially on the attenuator. The other item certainly is very important to operations, but Mr. Fairborn explained, basically it's a crash barrier that helps preserve the safety of our employees if, God forbid, an unwitting motorist were to run into it. But one thing I think he didn't mention is it also reduces the severity of the impact to the motorist. So there's safety, there's still going to be damage, there may be injury, but not like somebody running into the back. You know what a rear end collision at full speed looks like with a vehicle, sir. And so there's value on both ends of that. So I certainly would support that at a bare minimum.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts about that? Or Mr. Burke?
And potentially it could reduce the amount of insurance increases in the future if there was such an accident. So that's another good reason to have the attenuator, especially.
Mr. Townsend, did you have any thoughts on that? Okay, good.
And I would point out that without the other dump truck, I mean, basically we have a chassis sitting over there. And the nice blend of these two, even though the 77,000 is definitely an amount that's bigger than a bread box for me, that is a significant component of our heavy-duty fleet in snow events that will not be out on the streets serving our citizens. It's often put, does the city manager have any kind of an appetite for these particular capital expenditures, one-time expenditures? For these two, because one is a direct service in a weather event that is significant to our citizens, and the other one is the safety of our personnel. The city manager would have an excellent appetite if the council were to fund both of those.
Okay. So if there's no objection, we'll go ahead and modify the budget for that for presentation at a later. Is that okay? Ms. Abdel, go ahead.
Just a quick question. So I guess I'm confused if you're recommending it tonight, but you didn't recommend it previously. Why the difference?
Because I cannot recommend to the council an operating budget that's in the negative. Only the
And-
council can
and-
spend
Right,
the
and we've set
available
our
fund
policy
balance.
at 20%, correct?
Well, there is available fund balance of the 20% reduces the gross fund balance by $2,015,000. That leaves an available fund balance of $1,303,000. The city manager does not have the discretion to plug in available fund balance for any sort of a purchase. I can make recommendations to you all of what to use with that money. You may remember a couple of years ago, we came up with a list of items to use for available fund balance, but I cannot plug in to a budget that I am presenting to you something that within the existing fiscal year, I could, but I never would. Within the existing fiscal year, those existing revenues have to exceed those existing or match those existing expenses. The available fund balance at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, that's not up to me to do. I can make recommendation to you all, but you all have to finalize those. So these would be the equivalent of if the council came back to me and said, give us a list that we can go off of, like we did 2 years ago at a work session, these would be the first two items on that list.
Mr. Barber?
Well, I certainly support that. Number one, we can't say that our employees are important and then not take steps to protect them and our citizens as well. So I think that certainly is a no-brainer. And I think, if anything, last year taught us that, better to be lucky than good, but being conservative. This certainly is very conservative, but everything on that list is necessary and needed, so I would support it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Circo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree with the council here. The attenuator, obviously, it needs to be there. We need to protect our people out in the streets against people driving down the streets and protect their lives and their abilities. And then you got a chassis. You've got a vehicle we need desperately. We need two with the size of the city, the growth, the snow events. We need that truck. So I can see this finances these $106,362 will be worth it to look into doing that for you, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. If there's nothing else, go ahead, Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir. We enter the park fund. As in any given year, as long as the park board is proposing to me a balanced budget where operating expenditures do not exceed revenues projected for the year and available fund balance to start the year, I turn it over to you unchanged from what they have submitted to me. Revenues in fiscal year 2021, there is budgeted to transfer back into the Parks and Recreation Fund from the VERT Fund an amount of $56,192 as we transition from the vehicle purchase to the Enterprise Leasing Fund. When you look at the Park Fund summary page, you will see that under operating revenues, but again, it is a one-time transfer in, and the park summary page is actually on page 157 of your budget book. That one-time transfer, again, what occurred, and I'll be talking to this again, what occurred is when we went from the VERT program with a priori funding of a vehicle to the Enterprise Leasing Fund of those same vehicles, we went to a pay-as-you-go, if you will. So let's say we had vehicle A and it was to be purchased this year in fiscal year 2021 that we're proposing, and it was a $10,000 vehicle, and we were going to lease it over a period of 5 years. We would have already accumulated $8,000 against that vehicle in the past, $2,000 a year for those 4 years, $2,000 then in this year to then make the purchase for that vehicle A. Because we're leasing it, that $8,000 isn't needed to make the lease payment going forward. It needs to be transferred back in the fund that is going to be making the lease payment. Does that make sense to everybody? So In the park fund, that amount is actually $56,192 going back in, and then some vehicles remain in the VERT fund that don't go on the enterprise leasing fund, specifically any pickup that's over 550 and other rolling stock like Kubota mowers that are, and we designate those as rolling stock. There is some equipment in there, but we're going to be slowly moving those donations into the building and equipment replacement fund associated with those. That will simply be a later, once we get the enterprise fund up and running, that will be a later transfer from the VERT fund where it's been accumulating into the BERT fund. So the point of that being, when you see the percentage numbers going down in the park fund and the recommended transfer increase into the park fund from the park sales tax fund, you have to remember that 56,000 of the revenue is only a one-time item and not a continuous operating revenue to be considered. The park levy for next year is proposed and first time voted by the City Council at 11 39/100, which means that of each dollar that comes into the city from the levy, 9.08 cents goes for funding the city's park and recreation program. Currently projected, the levy will raise $434,873 in fiscal year 2021, or approximately 28.43% of the park fund revenue. And again, those percentages are based on not including the 56,000 if you're out doing the math. Program revenue overall is budgeted to account for approximately 37.64% of all the revenue into the Parks and Recreation Fund. This is an amount of $575,776 in fiscal year 2021. Park sales tax fund transfer. In addition to the park levy, proceeds from part of the city's 2.5-cent sales tax go to the park sales tax fund. An amount necessary to balance the park and recreation budget is then transferred to the park fund. Because in this particular year, as we have discussed, the staff recommendation is that 15% of the council discretionary amount go into the park sales tax fund and 5% go into the stormwater fund. That increases the amount in the park sales tax fund that can be transferred into the Parks and Recreation Fund by $50,000 to an amount of $400,000 for this 1 year only to get us through the uncertainty that's associated with the pandemic. It's kind of a two-step process, which is why we're recommending that council discretionary change between park sales tax and stormwater sales tax, so that up there in the line items of the revenue, we can increase from the $375,000 this year to the $400,000 in fiscal year 2021. Again, suggested transfer from the general fund as in all other years past of $100,000. Expenditures in the Parks and Recreation Fund are budgeted to increase from fiscal year 2020 by an amount only of $5,083, primarily associated with normal personnel movement through the chart and changes in personnel. Again, what I would note for the council is when you're looking at page 157 and you get down to the bottom in the green, you see revenues over expenditures of $59,721, but $56,192 of those revenues is associated with the one-time revenue associated with the transfer in from the VERT fund, should not be considered an operating revenue. So you're looking closer to a $3,000 revenue over expense in fiscal year 2021. That concludes the park fund. If the council has any questions. Thank you, sir. The enterprise fund, the highlights for this one, and we've kind of gone through this when we talked with the council about the water and sewer rates. Want to point out that from a revenue standpoint, We had originally proposed to the council a 54-cent increase that was associated with the sewer rate and a 0% increase in the water rate for our citizens. Again, that will be coming to you in a public hearing coming up in the next few weeks. In work session, we had actually proposed that the sewer rate increase be 54 cents associated with two items. Number one, the Little Blue Valley Sewer District had proposed to us a significant increase in their flow rates, and Middle Big Creek, we knew, was going from the current $32.50 per connection to $37 per connection, at least in the short term for this particular fiscal year, definitely. After challenging Little Blue on their estimate of flow rates on the part of Ms. Williams, we were able to actually propose to the City Council a decrease from what we had brought to you in work session in the sewer portion of this, and still achieve cost of service from 54 cents to 30 cents, which is what is being proposed in the enterprise fund for the fiscal year 2021 budget. Solid waste, once again, we have not received from our provider their proposed fiscal year 2021 rates. Right now, those rates are $14.45 for trash and yard waste only, $19.65 for trash, yard waste, and recycling, and a $1.50 on top of those amounts for a cart service fee for our citizens. Transfers out, again, as was discussed, the formula that we use to transfer out to the general fund for fiscal year 2021 remains the same. That formula is on page 217 of your budget and is $967,988. And to transfer into the Enterprise Capital Maintenance Fund, as in all other years, that is the fund that is used for maintenance of existing line, not growth, in the amount of $600,000, which is a duplicate of what it was in fiscal year 2020. No expansion items of note in either the Enterprise Fund or the Parks and Recreation Fund, and no expansion items of note in either of those funds either. That concludes the report on the Enterprise Fund, sir. Thank you. Moving on to the Debt Service Fund. Prior to the close of fiscal year 2021, total debt service payment is scheduled to be, let me caveat this, nothing that I'm talking about in the Debt Service Fund includes the August 4th bond issue. The unusual situation of having passed a sizable bond issue 2 weeks before I had to present this. Everything was in place, but I am going to give you kind of an amended version here in just a second. So we anticipate, prior to the bond issue payments associated with any issues that will come out of the August 4th no tax increase bond issue, $3,274,375 in payments. This is associated with 8 issues that are currently outstanding. Total debt of the city is currently $28,470,000, which is way below either our regular or special margins that we could actually be bumping up against with our debt limit. Many of our surrounding communities can no longer take out general obligation bond issues for a few years until they start paying that down, because both their special margin and their general margin are bumped up against for any future bond issues. The associated preliminary plan for finance, Mr. Goffey has gotten with us. He has reflected a 2% annual growth and a constant debt levy of 7170 as promised to our voters. We will more than likely be almost immediately, perhaps within the next 3 council meetings, bringing to you a parameters ordinance like we always do, because we always go with a competitive sale of our bonds, not a private placement. A competitive sale of $9 million in 2020, almost immediately. Immediately after the first of the year, a competitive sale of another $9 million, and a final sale in 2022 of $5.5 million to get us up to the amount that we asked the voters for. All of those will be bank qualified scenarios, and Mr. Goffey right now is anticipating interest rates for the 2020 issue not to exceed 2%, which is very good timing for us. The projects that will be associated with the 2020 or the fiscal year 2021 capital budget I'll get to in just a moment. Our internal services funds include the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund and the Restricted Revenue Fund. The detail for the Restricted Revenue Fund is on page 249. I would like to take just a couple of seconds to talk about the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund in light of the changeover to the Enterprise Leasing Fund. What you see listed in your budget on page 31 of my message includes those items that are the second part, the items that are not normal vehicles under 550 or extraordinary, or vehicles that are over 550 and extraordinary rolling stock that we would still be purchasing out of the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund. They include 2 salt spreaders for engineering, digital cameras for the patrol cars. Those are one of the items that I said earlier to the council we're going to be moving over into the Building and Equipment Replacement Fund. For now, they're in here. Streets, 1 snowplow and 1 Kubota mower. Water and sewer, 1 sewer easement machine. Parks and Recreation, 1 Kubota mower, 1 Gator, 1 Case tractor, and 1 brush hog. The same way that I discussed with the City Council, the $56,000 that was being transferred out of the VERT fund back into the Parks and Recreation Fund for enterprise vehicles that would be moving forward instead of looking backwards, the Enterprise Fund had an amount associated with that of $84,525, which is also in the percentages that I give to the council within the detail of this, not included as operating revenue. When I went through the general fund, you will note there was not that same block of money. Here's why. The total amount of the transfer back into the general fund for vehicles associated with enterprise leasing, where we would no longer need the VERT fund to fund them, includes $76,595 in all of those vehicles that are not associated with the police department, and $218,778 in vehicles associated with the police department. Or I'm sorry, $142,183 in vehicles associated with the police department, for a total amount from the general fund of $218,778. I am not proposing to the City Council that this amount be transferred back into the general fund. Here is why. We have added on and gotten a vehicle that into our fleet, our police department and emergency management fleet, that is very expensive. It would be irresponsible of us to not begin the process of planning for replacement of that vehicle or a like vehicle or a like system in the next 25 years. When you look at the inflation rates that are associated with specialized vehicles, they're actually very low. They're slightly over 0.1% per year. So I have plugged in against a $475,000 purchase, 25 years worth of inflated amounts at 0.2% per year. And that would mean that a like system in 25 years would cost us just under $500,000, or $499,329 for the chassis of a vehicle. That does not include the technology that we have placed into the vehicle. In planning for that, I am proposing to the council that the VERT fund retain $164,084 for seed payment, if you will, against a future system associated with a mobile command vehicle, which would be chassis only, and that out of the VERT fund, there be transferred into the Building and Equipment Replacement Fund for the technology associated with the current vehicle, because it's going to have to be replaced even quicker, obviously, because the technology will give out in probably 6 to 8 years of $54,695. That would allow then for a manageable and actually a reduction in the overall VERP contribution associated with PD and emergency management over that 25-year period for a vehicle or system associated the same of $13,410, which is actually less of a VERT payment than we have for some of our public works vehicles, significantly less. There would also be an additional VERT payment not associated with this, but an actual increase in the PD VERT payment of $3,000 associated with the brand new UTV that just came on. That would be a 10-year VERT payment to replace that UTV, same as we had in the past with the old one. So that would conclude staff's report on the Internal Services Fund, if council has any questions. Thank you, sir. That concludes staff report on the operating funds. If council is okay with charging forward, we would move into the capital funds at this time. Thank you, sir. In past years, I've gone into a significant amount of detail relative to the CIP that's associated with this. That is really for another day and another night when we're presenting the overall. Tonight is actually not a presentation of the CIP. It is the capital funds that are associated with next year's budget. So last year I changed that format around a little bit and presented to you all the same way that I actually present to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The mayor is familiar with this, where I simply go over the projects that are associated out of the capital fund that is being recommended by the CIP committee to me, and me in turn to you all. There have been very few changes. I will point one out that is a difference between what the CIP recommended and an ad that I asked them to put in for next year. And to follow along, these sheets are a little bit odd because of the bond issue coming on. So what you see on page 266 of your budget is the actual non-bond issue items that are being paid for or proposed in the fiscal year 2021 capital budget. Those total $3,115,338. You see a list of the detailed items that includes next year's bond issue items, and that amount goes up to $10,815,338. On page 268 of your budget, you see a list of all of the projects that are associated with it, and that matching amount of $10,815,338. The first items I will be going through are strictly the capital fund budgets not or projects not associated with the bond issue. You all are pretty familiar with the bond issue items, but I'll go back through them when I'm done here. First item that's being proposed is Public Works door access system. In fiscal year 2021, we would like to get to all of the last locations that do not use the same key access system as all the rest of our buildings have, and specifically those locations are Public Works, and down at the Owen Good lift station you'll see that access system card system proposed for down there when we get further into the and down to the Enterprise Capital Maintenance Fund. Projects associated with the Transportation Fund. There are two non-regular projects, Falcon and Condor cul-de-sacs. Both of these streets end in a dead end, and large vehicles like buses and trash trucks have to actually back off of those streets. That's not safe. So we were proposing cul-de-sacs for the end of both Falcon and Condor. Roadside trail maintenance, we have a significant amount of non-sidewalk related, and the example I will use is Lucy Webb Road, the trail that's on the south side. We run into year after year the need on a kind of a random basis, but we hear about them pretty regular for the need for repairs for those. So we're proposing to the council to address those repairs and not dip into other sources of funding like patching and streets work, that we have a set amount of $25,000 out of the transportation fund for those particular repairs. Within the capital improvement fund, we have several items that are associated with this particular fund that we'd like to propose out of the fiscal year 2021 capital budget. The sidewalk gap program includes 4 particular projects. Fox Ridge Drive from Fox Ridge East to Old Mill Road on the south side of the road, which basically takes it from the venue projects where we put the sidewalk in when we put Fox Ridge in a couple of years ago, all the way past 4 homes that are on the south side to match up with the sidewalk that is on Old Mill Road. And again, that's on the south side of the road, south and then east side of the road. Second item is actually misnamed. As those of you who are familiar with the area know, Knoll Creek Lane and Halls Creek do not connect on Kurzweil Road. That's actually Prairie Lane. And what this will do is provide a loop through that neighborhood. Won't get you out on the Prairie Lane, but it will provide a nice walking loop within the neighborhood. Johnson Drive between Darrowby and Dean, kind of the same application as Fox Ridge Drive. We put Johnson Drive in, we were hoping for development a little quicker, so we were hoping that development would pay for those sidewalks, but now we need to fill that gap so people have walkability there. North Adams Street from 58 Highway North to the north property line of 208 West Walnut. Obviously, West Walnut is also 58 Highway, but what this does is it connects to a sidewalk coming down out of that particular subdivision, which then there's a gap to get to 58 Highway. So for walkability, we need to go ahead and fill that gap. This particular fund in the fiscal year 2021 capital improvement fund also calls for replacement of the baseball concession stand doors. And then the one item that I have added that was not recommended to me by the CIP committee, but we hear about a lot. People complain that, or have concerns that the hill leading up to the clubhouse on 163rd Street is very dark. We have placed street lights in according with National Transportation Safety standards at both the intersection into High Creek, and they also exist on Fox Ridge as you turn up there. So both the intersections are lit. There is a significant amount of space then to actually get up to the clubhouse in that same area. So we were proposing 2 street lights. It has easily risen to the #1 street light complaint we have besides Franklin Street in the city. Out of the stormwater sales tax fund, we're proposing 1 non-regular expenditure in next year's capital budget, and that's the Silver Lake Circle groundwater diversion. For years and years and years, at the top of the hill there are a couple of homes that actually discharge legally into their front yards, but then the water is constantly running down the hill, and in the winter creates a very large ice skating rink in the intersection on Johnson Drive. And in the fall and again in the spring, the leaves get mushed up into basically a gooey, muddy mash in that particular area. This calls for diverting all of that groundwater into a pipe and getting it directly into our stormwater system. That one is also a long time coming. Within the Park Sales Tax Fund, there are two proposed non-regular capital projects. TB Hanna Station site work. The site work at TB Hanna was not included. We've gotten all the new amenities in there, but this is some of the finalization of the sidewalk or site work that's associated with that, to include final grading, landscaping, everything that's associated with the all-inclusive spray ground and playground that are already in. Playground, as you know, is already open. Spray ground, we're hoping to have kind of a trial opening. We'll have to close down pretty quick immediately after that, but we're hoping to have a trial opening sometime in the next couple of weeks. We're waiting on one piece of equipment. Hawks Nest Playground, $150,000. This project commits $150,000 in matching funds as part of a Land Water Conservation Fund grant through the National Park Service. Well, we are assured of that grant. So this means $300,000 would be funded up within for that all-inclusive playground that has been a long time coming up at Hawk Ridge Park. Figuring the council might ask, this amount would put us over $600,000 in grants and donations into the park. I am instructed by Mr. Mustine to give the conservative number of the cost for the total build out of that all-inclusive park, which was originally at $850,000. We think it's going to actually come in under that with some help that we're actually getting on the initial cost of the equipment that's to go in there. Out of the Enterprise Capital Maintenance Fund, a significant number of non-recurring cost projects. Hydrant replacement. You may remember that we did a hydrant survey and we found that there are a number of hydrants that need to be replaced over a period of time here in the city for public safety. Total cost for that particular project to change out 15 of those hydrants, $146,880. All the rest of these are associated with the Owen Good Lift Station itself and a condition analysis coming from the Owen Good Lift Station. The force main condition analysis, you may remember several years ago, we did a significant study on the condition of that. Time to revisit that study to see if there's been continued deterioration in the places that we did not in situ form at that time. Cost for that particular analysis is $95,000. Obviously significantly down from the amounts that we paid originally because we have the groundwork, pardon the pun, the groundwork already done for that particular work. Owen Good Lift Station improvements includes removing sediment from the wet well at Owen Good Lift Station, $70,000. As I had said earlier, the final leg of our access and security camera system down there at a cost of $30,000, and replacement of the security gates associated with that station at a cost of $15,000. In addition to these singular capital projects for fiscal year 2021, we have our recurring projects that occur each year, and these are, it's kind of easy to overlook these numbers, but they're significant. So staff is proposing to the City Council for your approval, street preservation and thoroughfare route maintenance in the total amount of $1 million for fiscal year 2021. Curb replacement in the amount of $750,000 in fiscal year 2021. And inflow and infiltration in the amount of $132,458 in fiscal year 2021. You see that across several of the funds, but we have managed to, that's a lot of money in maintaining our infrastructure that we have the privilege from our citizens of being able to do for them every single year. In addition to those particular capital funds, in fiscal year 2021, this is preliminary, but the GEO bond projects that we would like to get to are in the winter, the winter of 2020, $600,000 for Ward Road design, $3,900,000 for Ward Road construction. In addition to that, of course, would be the county added amount. Hearing some interesting things for the Ward Road construction from Mr. Crass as far as some ideas that we've got for the curb and gutter and for some pedestrian crossings that could be associated with that, and some lighted pedestrian crossings for safety from the west side to the east side of Ward Road. Pretty excited about that project. That will be, no fail, the first project out of the chute that we will be proposing to the council. We're proposing in the spring of 2021, both City Hall design and the back area of City Hall. We will have finished the retention area, but actually making that into an event center to complement City Hall and Centerview. $400,000 in the spring of 2021. Centerview design and construction, as far as the expansion of Centerview and outdoor areas are concerned, $1,200,000 in the spring of 2021. Johnson Drive construction and design, we have $600,000 in the budget. There's already an amount that has been set aside by the council in the budget. We also anticipate that Westgate is going to come in cheaper than we had originally proposed in the budget. So Johnson Drive will be done, and it will be done very, very well in the summer of 2021. We are proposing design only for Sunset 163rd in 2020. West Hawk Ridge design in the winter of 2020 in the amount of $100,000. The RAC design only in the winter of 2021 for $300,000. The I-49 grant match, we've plugged in $3 million for the fall of 2021 because the schedule that we gave to the council was very aggressive on that. We turned in today a significant amount of requested information on the build grant that we have in, as far as projected jobs generated, the cost that would be associated with that, the cost benefit analysis that is associated with that particular project, which is very high compared to some of the other projects that have been submitted against the build grant for this particular year. Kurzweil is the last item that we would be funding up with the bond funds. Obviously, we can only take out so much in bank qualified. That would be pushed out to 2023. Street lights, however, would be in fiscal year 2021, the winter of 2021, which means it would be on the second bond issuance that goes out. That would be $1,102,000 for the street lights associated with the bond issue. That concludes the staff report on the capital fund, sir.
Anybody have any questions? Mr. Feuerborn? Yes, Mr. Holman?
You mentioned the streetlight addition at 163rd Street, and then you said that was probably the number one location where we get concerns about lack of lighting. You mentioned Franklin. I'm assuming that would be taken care of, or at least partially addressed with the GEO bond money that we're going to do with. Is that
That's correct.
correct assessment as well? And then my second question was, you talked about a trial run of the new splash park. I'm assuming that would include Miss Harmer, since she did the trial run of our skating rink. Is that a correct assumption?
I'm not so sure, sir. I do not want to speak for Miss Harmer. I see her back there, but
She's just saying, I think she's going to give that a try again. Anyone have anything else? Mr. Feuerborn?
thank you, sir. This is several years in a row now that we have proposed, and I hope the council will grant the requested salary increases for our people. A significant budget issue that we will be bringing to you as a budget amendment in September of this year is we cannot ignore the fact that this city is growing and growing fast. In addition to taking care of our existing people, we would be short-sighted if we did not begin now to consider a studied plan for adding additional personnel, especially in boots-on-the-ground positions. Our police officers, our parks personnel, our public works personnel, and our communications officers. All of those areas need to be looked at. I will be asking next month for the council to do a budget amendment on the comp class study to reclassify that as a workforce development study, to look at those 4 areas specifically. There is currently $40,000 set aside in the restricted revenue fund to do just that. With the medium range, not even long range proposal to use that study in April of 2021 to propose to the city council a ballot issue to put the use tax in front of our voters. This would allow us to give a specific, we would be using this for nothing other than to bring on police officers, using the general fund sales tax portion of that, because when you pass the use tax mirrors and cannot exceed all of the sales taxes that you are currently proposing. So across the board, we would be able to propose out of the general fund use tax additional personnel in the police department and the communications department using those funds. We would be able to propose in the park fund using additional transfer from the park sales tax fund, as we did this year, a increase in parks personnel that would also be necessary, and in the public works and streets fund, either the general fund money or the stormwater sales tax fund, transportation sales tax fund that also transfers into the general fund to pay for those personnel as well. It would strictly be used for additional personnel, not to supplement additional or take the place of or be used to increase fund balances in any way. We would prove up new personnel to serve our citizens out of every dime of that proposed use tax, and we would be able to show the people that this study shows us what we need now and in the next 10 years into the future. Just wanted to let the council know that particular shot across the bow this evening, because I will be proposing it, and it will be a significant budgetary issue in the next fiscal year, sir.
Jim, do we have a latest estimate on what a use tax would generate?
I will be giving that to you in September, sir.
Okay.
When I make the proposal. I'd like to get those numbers trimmed a little tighter. It is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay. And as we all know, during this COVID crisis, a lot of spending habits have changed and transferred to that particular type of purchasing that escapes our community.
Exactly, sir.
Anybody else have anything? You have anything more to add, sir? You're all done? All through? Anybody over there at Gilmore want to say anything? Murdoch, you've always got something to say. Oh, they're all just waving. Okay. I love it. Okay, well, if there are no questions, you've given us a lot to absorb here. Hopefully we can absorb it in the next couple of weeks before the first reading.
As always in the past, and as you saw on the cover of the agenda, sir, we will have 3 work sessions, including both of the work sessions in October and the one in September. The second work session of September, we will have the unusual situation of 3 weeks off for the council after next week's regular council meeting, because we will have a 5th Monday, which we will not be meeting on, and then we will have the Labor Day holiday.
Okay. Mr. Holman.
Just a little bit of reflection, having done this for a few years, so I don't remember. This used to be a Saturday event that took us in excess of 4 hours. So Mr. Fearborn has really trimmed this down to a 2.5-hour session. I think we've really streamlined the process. Also, I would remind everybody of your thoughts back in April of this year, we would never have been this optimistic about the budget that he's presented to us. This is really good news.
It really is. Thank you. And I'm really glad that, that Jim, your team put together a plan for the capital improvements with regard to the road infrastructure, the overlay and the curb replacement. 'Cause, probably that's, other than us not wearing masks, that the other thing that I do get dinged on is a curb replacement. And there's a lot of people that mention that from time to time and would appreciate it. So I'm glad we're going to add a little more to that this year and potentially get some more curbs replaced. So thank you for doing that.